When Daniel Ricciardo made the decision to move away from Red Bull in 2018, it shocked the Formula One world. Not only had it become clear that the Red Bull team's focus was purely on the shoulders of the young Max Verstappen, but it also showed that Ricciardo was willing to roll the dice on his chances of achieving a world championship, a feat which many believe he is capable of achieving. Since this time, Ricciardo has had two relatively tough seasons with Renault where he didn't quite achieve what he was hoping for, to then for this season to move to McLaren, a team that's been on the rise over the last 2 years. I think it's fair to say that this season hasn't gone to plan so far for the Australian driver, but should Daniel Ricciardo regret leaving Red Bull? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Daniel Ricciardo's move from Renault to McLaren happened before any competitive action in 2020. This suggested that he was not only unhappy with their 2019 performance, but he was also not buying into the team's long-term plan. And sure enough, in 2020, Renault were close to McLaren, but ended up a couple of positions behind them in the championship. But also, the Renault team direction changed completely with the rebrand to Alpine, and with Cyril Abiteboul leaving the team at the end of the season. So Ricciardo's move was clearly a sensible one, with McLaren on the rise and achieving third in the Constructors' Championship last season. But so far, Ricciardo struggled and currently has less than half of the points of his less experienced teammate, Lando Norris. In this video, I'll take a look at the factors that led to Ricciardo leaving in the first place, what could have been if he'd have stayed at Red Bull, and what his prospects are at McLaren, considering his first few races. And as always, if you enjoy the video, then please leave it a like and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Why Ricciardo left Red Bull in the first place? Ricciardo had been at Red Bull since 2014, the start of the turbo hybrid era. He was replacing Mark Webber, a driver that was well respected, but had very much been a number 2 driver for that team during their dominant era. So moving into that team environment after a couple of years at Toro Rosso, Daniel Ricciardo was undoubtedly entering a team that was fully focused on Sebastian Vettel, who had obviously won the previous 4 World Championships in a row. But during the 2014 season, the Australian driver ended up comfortably beating the German driver, with Ricciardo scoring 238 points to Vettel's 167. It became a bit of a changing of the guard for the team, as they fell back from the heights of winning the 4 double World Championships in a row and became more of a challenger team. It seemed like Ricciardo's achievements would propel him into their lead driver role, particularly given his teammate Sebastian Vettel made the move across to Ferrari for the 2015 season. 2015 was a particularly challenging year for Ricciardo at Red Bull, as he ended up finishing behind his new teammate Daniel Kvyat in the standings, and the team didn't reach the performance levels that they had achieved even in 2014. But the other change in 2015 was the introduction of Max Verstappen to Toro Rosso, the young prodigy that was clearly destined to join the main team long term. And after a bumpy start to 2016 for Daniel Kvyat, Verstappen did indeed get promoted to the Red Bull team. And this is what really marked the beginning of the end for Daniel Ricciardo's time at Red Bull. With the team going through a rebuilding process, they also turned their focus to the Dutchman, who won his first race at the Spanish Grand Prix after being promoted. But in 2016, Ricciardo did end up ahead of Verstappen in the standings, even when you just account for the time that they were both at the team, and he then repeated this achievement in 2017. For me, this was the time where Verstappen was still in a learning phase. He would frequently make mistakes, which is one of the reasons that he ended up behind Ricciardo over the course of a season, but he was also betting into the team, and really laying foundations to build the team around him. Come 2018, there was a bit of a changing of the guard for the team once again, as Ricciardo ended up 6th in the championship to Verstappen's 4th place finish. But also the Australian driver definitely got the worst luck of the two, with 8 DNFs across the 21 race season, and these non-finishes were predominantly related to issues with his Renault power unit elements, and these setbacks were then compounded late on in the season, with grid drop penalties putting him out of contention at many races. So it wasn't just the DNFs across the season that held him back. It was this poor season for Ricciardo that pushed him out the door, as not only did he have the bad luck to lose out to Verstappen across the season, it then meant that the writing was on the wall, as the team's lead driver had become Verstappen, as the team looked towards the future. There was also another push factor here, which was Red Bull making the switch to Honda power units for 2019. Now in hindsight, we can see that when compared to the Renault engine today, the team made the right decision to switch to Honda power units. but at the time the Honda engine was well and truly the worst on the grid, and not deemed to be capable of competing with their rivals. So despite the reliability challenges that Ricciardo faced in 2018 with his Renault power unit, he chose to make the move to the engine supplier's main team for the 2019 season. This move was decided by multiple factors, as I've discussed already, with the combination of Red Bull's focus heading towards their young prodigy, as well as the team making the change to their power unit. But from Ricciardo's public comments since then, it's also clear that he was simply unhappy with the Red Bull environment. He's a talented driver, and he's aware that he needs to have a team that suits him if he wants to achieve the results that the 7-time race winner has shown he's capable of. What could have been had he stayed at Red Bull? Red Bull's team principal Christian Horner, as well as the whole Formula 1 community, were well and truly caught off guard by Ricciardo's move. It was heavily rumoured that he would be staying with the team for 2019, and this makes sense, as Mercedes and Ferrari, the other front-running teams on the grid, had their drivers sorted for the upcoming season already, and moving to any other team would be a significant step back for Ricciardo. However, he made the move, and Horner has been quoted to say that he thought Ricciardo was joking when he said that he'd agreed terms with Renault. Now, I won't look into the Renault period of Ricciardo's career too much at the moment, but instead look at what could have been had he stayed at Red Bull. But to bring you up to speed if you're not aware, the Australian driver chose to leave Renault after his 2-year deal with the team had ended. Red Bull in the meantime have had what seems like a revolving door of drivers occupying the seat that Ricciardo left vacant ever since he left, with 3 drivers taking on the role in as many seasons. First up, the team promoted Pierre Gasly, a driver with just over a year's experience in the Toro Rosso, which is a similar amount of time that Max Verstappen had. But the move probably came too soon in the French driver's career, as he struggled to get to grips with his new car, with very little experience of getting into cars and racing at the front of the order. Gasly was swiftly demoted back to the sister team, Toro Rosso, which pretty much rejuvenated his Formula 1 career as he achieved a podium later that year. Now, we don't know what happened behind closed doors in the off-season between the 2018 and 19 seasons, so we don't know whether Ricciardo was fighting against the team that had really put all of their development in the hands of Verstappen during the 2018 year. But the blame was certainly put on Gasly when he wasn't able to get up to speed in the car. Presumably, many development areas that Gasly requested were pretty quickly put to the bottom of the list in favour of tailoring that car to Verstappen's driving style. The situation was not one that would set themselves up for success in the Constructors' Championship if their car was capable of getting there, but that was clearly not the focus of the team. They instead promoted Alex Albon mid-season, a driver with just 12 races and 16 points under his belt in Formula 1, the least experienced driver to ever drive for that team. Now, Albon got off to a pretty great start in his Red Bull career, being put into an environment where he had little expectation on his shoulders. The team wanted to give him the second half of the season as a bit of a trial, an opportunity for the Thai driver to show what he was capable of. After all, it didn't really matter, as the team looked pretty set to achieve third in the Constructors' Championship that season, behind Mercedes and Ferrari. So it was a good opportunity to work out who would be the best fit for the team longer term. And it went really well. Although Albon didn't achieve his first podium for the team, he did score points in all but one of his races. And that race that he didn't get points was one where he should have ended up on the podium if it wasn't for Lewis Hamilton punting him around in Brazil. And they weren't low scoring points finishes either. Other than that Brazil result that I've already mentioned, all his finishes were 6th place or higher. Now, this is a great outcome, or so it seemed. The team had found a number 2 driver that could deliver good results and could be there to potentially collect a few podiums over the course of a full season. But he was also far enough behind Verstappen so as to not get in the way and create a bitter rivalry. However, there were also other factors at play here. Red Bull have generally become a team that have always developed later in their season compared to their rivals. Generally speaking, if they find themselves behind a team early on in the season, they'll develop their way to have a much better car by the end of it and at least close the gap to the team or teams ahead of them. So drafting Albon to compare his performances to Gasly's halfway through the season, when they're likely to have developed and understood their car to the extent that they could fight for race wins and podiums, is not a fair and direct comparison. Now, what's this got to do with Ricciardo? Well, had he stayed at Red Bull, he's likely to have found himself in an environment where his development suggestions would not be prioritised when compared to Verstappen's. and in an environment that was searching for a driver that would not step on Verstappen's toes, as he was their number one driver. So this could of course been different for the team if Ricciardo had stayed, but we can only really go off what we know now. And Ricciardo didn't really want to do this either. He was working in a team that generally focuses on a single driver to take them to the championship. And realistically, if the Ricciardo-Verstappen partnership had continued for much longer, it could have got toxic. And there were signs that this was starting to be the case through 2018. Take their coming together in Baku, for example, which took both cars out of contention and went down as a racing incident, but is still a notable and controversial crash even today. So had Ricciardo stayed at the team, it looks like he'd have struggled to achieve what he was looking to in his career, which is of course winning a world championship. And there's every possibility that he'd have been thrown out of the team anyway to promote a younger driver from AlphaTauri if the relationship between himself and Verstappen had frayed. So there's a chance that he wouldn't have remained at the team at all for this long, given the Red Bull team liked to make changes. But if he was in that car still today, then he'd definitely be going for the championship. Then there's of course the hypothetical view as well, that if he'd have stayed at Red Bull, he would have been in contention for Sebastian Vettel's vacant Ferrari seat. The drive instead went to Carlos Sainz, but it would have been a better move from Ferrari to take a driver from a lead team and a rival. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to ignore this scenario, as it's impossible to know what could have happened. What are Ricciardo's prospects at McLaren? Ricciardo's now moved on to McLaren, a team that's well and truly on the rise. They achieved third in the championship in 2020, much supported by Ferrari's fall from grace. But there's no doubt that since 2019, where the team switched out both drivers and had some changes to their management structure, they've been working back towards where the team expects themselves to finish each season. And despite this new personnel and new drivers, they've not lost their winning mentality through their challenging years of 2014 to 2018. But as it turns out now, their car's very tricky to drive, and needs Ricciardo to make changes to his driving style to match the performance of his teammate Lando Norris, who knows no difference since he joined the McLaren team in 2019. Even Carlos Sainz has contacted Ricciardo this season to let him know about the challenging nature of the McLaren car. Because of this, Ricciardo's initial results at the start of this season have been poor, particularly when compared to his younger and less experienced teammate. The gulf between them has been one of the biggest surprises of the season so far, and it's worth noting that Ricciardo isn't the only one of the transferred drivers, as most of the transferred or new drivers to the teams have generally struggled more with less testing and practice time this season. But when the gap in the championship standings after 5 races to a driver that's been in the sport for just 2 full seasons is over double the Australian driver's total, you know something's going wrong for the new McLaren driver. I think Ricciardo will learn to adapt. After all, we've seen him do this when he went to Renault initially. For example, his trademark lick the stamp and send it dive bombs into heavy braking zones seemed to end as he struggled to get to grips with the brakes on his new car. And I expect it's a similar story with McLaren, so given time he'll surely get up to speed and challenge Norris more frequently. We've seen glimpses of this already with Ricciardo outperforming Norris in Spain, but there's certainly a long way to go for the driver of that team. So should Daniel Ricciardo regret leaving Red Bull? Well, for me, he absolutely shouldn't. It's quite likely that Red Bull will have broken up his partnership with Verstappen by this point anyway, had it continued to become more toxic with the two fighting on track. And even if not, the team was always being built around Verstappen. He's the team's prodigy, and probably the hottest prospect in the sport right now. So had he stayed, he wouldn't have been the one lifting the championship trophy at the end of the season if the team had anything to say about it. Ricciardo made his move when he was 29 years old. Not old by any means, but certainly not young in the sport of Formula 1. And particularly when you look at the grid right now, he's one of the oldest drivers out there at the age of 31. So if he wants to achieve a world championship, he's probably reaching his peak around now. And given it's unlikely that he would have done so at Red Bull, rolling the dice on his career and moving to Renault and now McLaren is giving himself the best possible chance at getting a world championship before he retires. I think it's unlikely that he'll do so, but it would be a shame if Ricciardo never won a championship with the amount of talent that he has. But in Formula 1, anything can happen, and it sometimes does. So that's my view on Ricciardo and whether he should regret leaving Red Bull. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video and watched this far, then please consider hitting the like and subscribe button for more videos just like this one in the future.